Within moments of my cries, a small crowd of neighbours gathered around us in the dusty yard outside our house. I was holding Obi as his body convulsed, and I felt a surge of hope that someone would know what to do. But that hope quickly turned to fear as I saw the confusion and panic in their eyes. One neighbour, a stout middle-aged woman named Mama Chidi, pushed through the others. "Lay him down here," she ordered. My hands trembled as I laid Obi on the ground under the shade of a mango tree. He was still jerking and frothing at the mouth. I knelt beside him, holding his hand, not wanting to let go. People were shouting suggestions all at once. "Put a spoon in his mouth so he doesn't swallow his tongue," yelled one man. "No, bring palm oil to pour in his eyes," cried another. I was overwhelmed and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I tried to speak, to tell them just to help me get him to a clinic, but my voice was lost in the noise. Then I saw Mama Chidi run into her house and come out with something in her hand, a small tin container. She hurried over and I saw it was filled with dried red pepper powder. Before I understood what was happening, two other women grabbed Obi's limp, shaking body and turned him on his side. Another person yanked down his little shorts. "What are you doing?" I screamed, trying to push them away. "This will chase the evil spirit out, child," one of the women snapped at me. I felt someone hold me back by my shoulders as I tried to reach Obi. I kicked and cried, "Stop! You're hurting him!" But they didn't listen. Mama Chidi took a fistful of the red pepper powder and, to my horror, she rubbed it against my baby brother's bottom. She was putting the pepper in his anus, believing it would stop the convulsion or drive out whatever was causing it. Obi's body gave a violent jolt. I don't know if he felt the burn of the pepper or if it was just the convulsion continuing, but I saw his face twitch in what looked like pain. I sobbed and pleaded, "Please, no more." The pepper surely stung terribly. Even smelling it in the air made my nose and eyes water. Yet the convulsion did not stop. If anything, Obi's back arched and his arms flailed even more. The crowd was getting more frantic. I heard someone say, "The evil spirit is strong in this one." Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, an old man named Mr. Okafor, who sold yams in the market, rushed forward with a wild look in his eyes. He had brought out a large wooden mortar, the kind used for pounding yam or fufu, and a heavy pestle. My eyes widened in absolute terror as I guessed what he intended. "No, no, no!" I shrieked, my voice cracking. But I was shoved aside as two men lifted Obi's small, thrashing legs and forced them into the mortar bowl. "We have to pound out the demon before it takes the child," Mr. Okafor shouted. I will never forget that moment. The mortar was on the ground, and my brother's legs were jammed inside it. Mr. Okafor and another man each raised a pestle, a long, thick wooden pole. For a split second, time seemed to freeze for me. I saw my brother's face, eyes rolled back, foam at his lips, his body shaking. I saw those heavy pestles in the air about to come crashing down on his tender little legs. I was only 8, but I gathered every bit of strength and courage left in me. I lunged forward, trying to pull Obi out of the mortar, or at least shield him. I managed to throw myself partly over his upper body, screaming at the top of my lungs, "Stop! You'll kill him!" I was too late. There was a sickening thud as one pestle came down hard. It struck Obi's right foot and lower leg inside the mortar with a force that made a sound I can still hear in my nightmares, a horrible cracking sound. Obi's convulsion was finally stopping, but not because of the pepper or magic. I think it was simply running its course, or maybe the pain shocked his body. His limbs went limp, but I knew this limpness was not a peaceful one. It was the stillness of injury and exhaustion. He wasn't moving and his eyes closed. I thought for a terrible second that he had died. I was pushed away as the men paused, preparing for another strike, unsure if the demon was gone. I crawled back toward my brother, sobbing, "Obi, Obi." My sister Amaka was wailing somewhere behind me. Someone had pulled her away so she wouldn't see everything, but she saw enough and her cries were piercing. I clutched Obi's upper body, determined to cover him even if they hit me too. I couldn't let them continue. My brother's right foot was at a strange angle and blood was starting to stain the mortar. It was the most horrifying sight I had ever seen. Just as the second pestle was about to come down, I heard a new voice ring out, loud and commanding, cutting through the chaos. "Stop this at once!" The commanding voice belonged to an elderly woman I had seen occasionally on our street but didn't know well. Her name was Nurse Necker, a retired nurse who lived a few houses down. In that critical moment, she rushed forward with surprising speed for someone of her age. She wore a neat, simple dress and had a small bag in one hand. The crowd parted as she fearlessly stepped between the men with pestles and my injured, unconscious brother. "Have you all gone mad?" she shouted angrily. "You'll kill this child." The men lowered their pestles in shock and shame, and the others murmured and backed away. I was shaking and crying, still holding on to Obi. Nurse Necker knelt down beside him and quickly assessed the situation with experienced eyes. She felt his neck for a pulse and placed a hand near his nose to check if he was breathing. "He's alive," she said firmly, which made my knees weak with relief. I saw her frown as she noticed the pepper on Obi's body and the blood on his foot. She shot a fierce, scolding look at the neighbours. "Who did this?" she demanded, but no one answered. They all looked away, suddenly aware of their terrible mistake. There was no time to waste. Nurse Necker wiped some of the pepper away as best as she could, and then wrapped a clean handkerchief around Obi's bleeding foot. She carefully lifted my brother into her arms. Even though she was not young, she carried him with strength that came from urgency and compassion. "Ada, right?" she addressed me, knowing my name somehow. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Ada, you and your sister come with me. We must get him to the hospital now." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed little Amaka's hand. Amaka was trembling and hiccuping with sobs. She had seen too much and was terrified. I was not much calmer, but at least now an adult who knew what to do had taken charge. As we moved, I saw Nurse Necker glare at the crowd. "Shame on all of you," she said in a low, angry voice. "You should know better than to torture a child like this." Some of the neighbours hung their heads, and a few slipped away in guilt. I felt anger toward them too, but I was too focused on Obi to say anything. Mr. Bala, a neighbour who had a car he used as a taxi, was standing by. Nurse Necker pointed at him and said, "Bala, get your car now." He jumped into action, opening the doors of his old sedan. In a matter of seconds, we were inside. Nurse Necker sat in the back seat with Obi lying across her lap. I climbed in beside them, never letting go of Obi's hand, and I pulled Amaka onto my lap so she wouldn't be alone. Mr. Bala started the car and we sped off, leaving the stunned crowd of neighbours behind. The ride to the hospital felt like a blur. The roads were bumpy and every jolt made me worry about Obi, but Nurse Necker held him securely. I kept my eyes on my brother's face. His eyes were closed and his breathing was shallow. "Please be okay. Please be okay," I whispered over and over like a broken record. Amaka buried her face into my chest, crying softly and calling Obi's name. I tried to comfort her, even as my own tears didn't stop. "He'll be okay. The nurse is helping him. We're going to the doctor," I whispered to her, though I was also trying to convince myself. In the car, Nurse Necker asked me quickly, "Where are your parents, child?" I told her in a shaky voice that Mama and Papa were out of town until evening and that we had no telephone to reach them. Her face grew serious. "Don't worry, I will stay with you. We will take care of your brother," she assured me. She then focused back on Obi, checking his breathing and keeping pressure on his foot to slow the bleeding. I could see her dress getting stained with blood, and I felt guilty and horrible thinking it was my fault for taking him outside to the neighbours. I held on to Amaka and closed my eyes tight for a moment, sending a plea to God or anyone listening, maybe even to that unseen glowing friend of mine, to save my little brother. The siren of fear wailed in my head, but sitting next to Nurse Necker's calm determination was like a cool hand on my shoulder. I felt a glimmer of hope that Obi might survive this nightmare. The drive through the busy streets of Onitsha that afternoon seemed to take forever, but finally, I saw the gates of the hospital ahead. As we drove in, I braced myself. We had gotten him this far alive. Now it was up to the doctors and God to heal my brother. My heart pounded with worry, but I held on to that tiny hope that everything would somehow turn out all right. When we arrived at the hospital, everything happened very quickly. Nurse Neka carried Obi straight into the emergency area. A doctor and some nurses came with a stretcher and gently took my brother from her arms. They asked questions as they moved, and Nurse Neka answered since I was too shaken to speak clearly. She explained that he had a convulsion due to a high fever and that in the chaos he had a severe injury to his foot. I heard her carefully avoid saying exactly how it happened, simply stating, his foot was crushed during the convulsion. The doctors and nurses exchanged concerned looks. They rushed Obi through swinging double doors into a treatment room, and Nurse Neka followed them. Before she went in, she turned to me and said, "Ada, stay here with your sister. I'll come update you soon, I promise." I nodded numbly and sank onto a bench in the hallway holding Amaka's hand. My little sister's face was streaked with tears and dust, and I wiped her cheeks with my sleeve. We sat there, two frightened children on a wooden bench, listening to the muffled sounds of hospital workers, patients moaning, and the distant crackle of a loudspeaker calling doctors to different rooms. The hospital smell of antiseptic and medicine filled my nose, and it made the whole afternoon feel even more unreal. Time seemed to slow down. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. Amaka sniffled and curled up against my side. She was exhausted from crying. I was exhausted too, but I couldn't rest. I stared at the doors through which my brother had been taken, praying for any sign of news. My mind raced with worries. I wondered if Obi was even alive. What if he stopped breathing? What if the doctors couldn't fix his foot or something worse happened? I also worried about Mama and Papa. By now, the sun was lowering in the sky outside. They would surely be coming home to find an empty house. I imagined them calling our names and then finding out from neighbours the terrible things that happened. I felt a sharp guilt in my chest, thinking of how upset and scared they'd be. I wished I could tell them what was going on, and that I was sorry. But I had no way to reach them until they came here. After what felt like forever, Nurse Neka finally came out through the doors. I jumped up, nearly knocking poor Amaka off the bench. We ran to the nurse. She looked tired but gave us a small smile. "Your brother is alive," she said gently. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and started sobbing out of sheer relief. Nurse Neka hugged me and Amaka together, comforting us. She explained that the doctors had given Obi some medicine to stop any more convulsions and to bring down his fever. They were also treating his injuries. Is his foot going to be okay?" I asked in a shaky whisper. Nurse Neka's face grew sad. "His foot is badly hurt, Ada. The bones are broken," she replied softly. "The bone doctor is looking at it now. They will do their best to fix it, but we have to be prepared that it might not heal the same way as before." Her words made my stomach drop. I pictured Obi never being able to run or play properly again, and fresh tears rolled down my face. I thought of those neighbours, and anger flared in me, but mostly I felt heartbroken that my cheerful little brother was so hurt. The nurse led us to a small waiting room with chairs so we could be more comfortable. She even found a packet of crackers and a bottle of water for us. "Eat a little, my dear, you must be hungry and tired," she urged. I realised I was thirsty, and my throat was dry from screaming earlier, so I took a few sips of water. Amaka nibbled a cracker quietly, her eyes still red. I thanked Nurse Neka softly. She truly was like an angel sent to save us. As we waited, she stayed by our side, telling us that we had been very brave. She also said she had asked one of the hospital staff to try to call the main market office to see if they could locate our parents, but since Mama and Papa were out of town, it was unlikely they'd get the message in time. So we just had to wait for them to return in the evening and hear from the neighbours what happened. It was almost sunset when I heard familiar frantic voices down the hallway. Through the doorway of the waiting room, I saw Mama and Papa rushing in. They looked terrified and breathless, as if they had been running. The moment I saw them, all the emotion I had been holding in burst out. "Mama! Papa!" I cried, jumping up and running to them with a marker at my side. I flew into Mama's arms, and Papa wrapped all three of us in the tightest hug. Mama was already weeping, asking, "Where is Obi? Is he alive? Are you hurt? Oh, my babies, I'm so sorry." Her tears wet my hair and shoulder. Papa's face was pale and he looked like he was on the verge of tears too, though he was trying to stay strong. I could feel his hands trembling as he held us. We were together again, but our family still wasn't whole, not until we knew Obi was safe. I pulled back and managed to speak between sobs. "Obi is with the doctors. They are fixing him." I pointed towards the doors. Nurse Necker stepped forward to introduce herself to my parents gently and to tell them what was happening to my brother. In the medical words, I didn't know. We all braced ourselves for the full truth of what this day had done to our family. A young doctor in a white coat joined us in the waiting room while we huddled with our parents. His face was kind but serious. Nurse Necker stood beside him, having clearly given him a full report of what happened. My parents held on to us as the doctor cleared his throat and began to explain. He spoke gently, knowing he had hard news to share. "Your son is stable now," he said, and I felt my parents breathe out in relief. "We were able to control the fever and stop the convulsion with medication. We've also treated his injuries as best as we can." Papa nodded, holding Mama's hand tightly. "Please, doctor, how is our boy? How bad are his injuries?" Papa asked in a strained voice. The doctor sighed softly. "He has a severe injury to his right foot. The bones in the foot were badly broken. We have set the bones and put the foot in a cast. However, because of how crushed it was, I'm afraid the foot will not be the same. There may be permanent damage." Upon hearing this, Mama covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. Papa shut his eyes in pain, a tear escaping down his cheek as well. I felt a marker grip my arm tighter. My heart hurt so much I could barely stand it. But the doctor had more to say. "Also," he continued carefully, "because the convulsion went on for a long time before he received proper treatment, we are concerned about his brain. Lack of oxygen or prolonged seizures can sometimes cause brain damage in young children. We have not seen clear signs of severe damage at this time. He woke up briefly and cried, which is actually a good sign, but we need to keep him under close observation. As he grows, he will need to be watched to make sure he is growing and learning well. There is a chance he might have some learning difficulties or physical challenges later on, or even a risk of more seizures. It's too early to be sure. We just have to watch him and give him the care he needs." The room was silent except for quiet crying. I felt as if each word was a heavy stone dropping on my heart. Brain damage. The words echoed in my head. My sweet little brother might not grow up like other children because help came too late. Mama broke down, sobbing into Papa's chest. Through her tears, she kept saying, "It's our fault. It's all our fault." Papa's eyes were full of sorrow as he held her. "We should never have left them alone," he choked out. I couldn't bear to see my parents in such pain, and I also felt guilt welling up inside me. I stepped forward shaking and spoke in a tiny voice. I tried to help him. I did everything I could. I'm so sorry I couldn't stop it this time." My tears fell freely. Papa immediately pulled me into his arms as well. "Ada, no, you brave girl," he whispered, his voice cracking. "This is not your fault. You did all you could. You even saved a marker and tried to save Obi. We are the ones who are sorry." He stroked my hair while hugging me tightly. Mama wiped her eyes and nodded, reaching out to touch my face. "We put too much on your little shoulders," she said softly. "You should never have had to face that alone. We are so proud of you and so sorry we weren't there." I cried harder hearing Mama and Papa say that. In their eyes I saw only love and regret, not blame. That eased a little of the ache in my heart. After a few minutes, we all calmed down a bit. The doctor kindly gave us a moment, then said we could quietly see Obi for a short while. As a family, we followed him to the room where my brother lay. Obi was asleep on a small hospital bed, his tiny form looking even smaller under a light blanket. His right foot was wrapped in a thick white cast and raised slightly on a pillow. There were 4 tubes giving him fluids and medicine. His face was bruised, and there were bandages on his arms and one on his forehead. Seeing him like that, Mama let out a soft wail and rushed to his side, gently caressing his face and murmuring his name. Papa stood at the foot of the bed, wiping tears and looking like his soul was torn. I held Amaka's hand and we stood near the bed too. Obi's eyes were closed and he looked peaceful in sleep, but I knew our lively boy was hurt badly. I silently promised him I would always be there for him, no matter what he faced next. In that quiet hospital room, with the fading light of evening coming through the window, my parents made a solemn promise. They held each other and us, and Papa said in a low, firm voice, "Never again. We will never leave our children like that again. From now on, no matter what, we will make sure someone is watching over you." Mama nodded fiercely, adding through her sniffles, "We won't be careless with our precious babies ever again. Nothing is more important than you." I could feel the resolve and love in their words. Even though we were all shaken and devastated by what happened, we also felt united in that moment. We had almost lost Obi, and a part of him was permanently hurt, but we had not lost each other. We would get through this together as a family. I squeezed my parents' hands and looked at my sleeping brother. In my heart, I said the same promise. I will never let you down. I will do everything to help you get better, little brother. And as we stood there, I thought I felt a gentle warmth in the room, almost like that unseen friend from my convulsion days was watching over us. It gave me a small comfort in the midst of our sorrow. We brought Obi home from the hospital after a couple of weeks. Those first months after the accident were very hard for our family. Obi's foot was in a cast for a long time, and when the cast came off, his right foot looked different. It was slightly misshapen and weak. He had to go to the hospital many times for checkups and therapy to help him learn to use it again. I remember helping Mama do gentle exercises with him at home, moving his foot up and down while he whimpered, until slowly he could put weight on it. At first he could not walk at all, and we carried him everywhere. Then he used crutches made small for his size, swinging one leg carefully forward. Eventually he was able to walk on his own, but he always had a limp. His right foot and leg remained a little thinner and weaker than the left. When he walked, his foot would drag slightly, and he couldn't run fast without stumbling. It hurt us to see him like that, but we were also grateful he could walk at all. The doctor had said it was possible he might never walk, but my brother was determined even as a little child. He pushed through pain and fear with a courage that amazed all of us. We cheered for him the first time he took a few steps by himself in our yard. Papa lifted him high despite the limp and said, "My brave boy," and Obi laughed. That laugh was like music because we hadn't heard it in so long. As for Obi's mind, in the beginning we were worried he might not be the same bubbly boy. For a while after the hospital he was very quiet and clingy. He would cry if Mama left the room, even for a minute. We all stayed close to him, giving him love and comfort. With time, he became more like the cheerful child we knew. But we noticed a few differences as he grew. He talked a bit later than other kids his age. He was slower to learn new words, and sometimes he got confused or frustrated easily. When he was old enough to start school, learning the ABCs and numbers was a challenge for him. I was a few grades ahead, so every afternoon I would sit with him and help him practice writing and reading simple words. It took patience, but Obi tried his best. Sometimes he would tear up saying, "It's too hard," and I would hug him and say, "You can do it, little brother. I'm here to help you." Our parents also spent extra time with him on homework. Mama would make up songs to help him remember things, and Papa would draw simple pictures with him on a slate. Slowly but surely, Obi learned. He might not have been the top of his class, but he was learning, and that was what mattered. We all adjusted our lives around caring for Obi. True to their promise, Mama or Papa was always with us after that. If Papa had to travel for supplies, Mama stayed home. She even set up a small stall in front of our house for a couple of years, so she could watch us and still earn some money from home. When they both did eventually return to working at the market together, it was only after we got a trustworthy cousin to move in with us as a caretaker. Our family never forgot the lesson of that tragic day. Even our neighbours changed in some ways. A few of the ones involved in hurting Obi came to apologise later. Papa was very angry at them, but he and Mama decided to forgive them for their foolishness, though they kept a polite distance afterwards. We also made sure everyone in the neighbourhood learned from our ordeal. With Nurse Necker's help, my parents spread the word about proper ways to handle convulsions and fevers. They told people never to use dangerous methods like pepper or pounding. I think our story saved other children in the area from suffering the same way. In that sense, Obi's pain was not in vain. As the years passed, Amakar and I grew, and so did Obi. After age 5 or 6, Amaka never had convulsions again, and neither did I. The fever sickness seemed to leave our family as mysteriously as it had come. Obi, with his limp and gentle nature, became the heart of our household. He had a bright smile that lit up our home and a sense of humour that made us laugh even on tough days. Sometimes I wondered if he remembered what happened to him when he was 3. He never spoke of it because he was unconscious for most of it and too young to recall clearly. But he knew the story as he got older. We were honest with him about why his foot was damaged. It made him sad occasionally, and he would ask, "Why did they do that to me?" None of us could fully answer that, except to say they didn't know better, and that we would always protect him from now on. Whenever he said that, I hugged him extra tight. Inside, I silently thanked God, and perhaps that unseen guardian who I felt still watched over us. We had come through the worst, and together we would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Thanks for watching. Please encourage this channel with your likes, comments, and subscription.